Hi, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. I'm actually streaming on both channels, so I'm not going to use my usual introduction. But I just wanted to talk about this recent executive order that came by, or that was passed by the Trump administration recently, essentially criminalizing homelessness. On January 24th, Donald Trump passed an executive order which exposes the government's true agenda with devastating clarity. This order builds directly on the Supreme Court's June 2024 decision in City of Grant Pass versus Johnson, which gave states permission to criminalize homelessness itself, creating a perfect storm of constitutional violations and state control. This isn't about compassion. This isn't about helping people. This is about control, absolute control over our existence, our autonomy, and our right to make decisions about our own lives. Before we examine Trump's executive order, we first need to understand how the Supreme Court made this possible. And City of Grant Pass versus Johnson decided on June 28, 2024. The court made it, uh, they basically gave impunity to allow states to criminalize homelessness, making it illegal to exist in public spaces while poor. But here's where it connects to the arguments that I make in my upcoming book. During our oral arguments for this case, Justice Sonia Sotomayor asked the attorney defending criminalization laws whether homeless people should simply kill themselves if they have no place legal to exist. Of course, this was a rhetorical question because nobody actually answered that question. But here's where it connects to my book. This wasn't just about homelessness. This is Sotomayor accidentally revealing the logical endpoint when the government has made living impossible by making our quality of lives miserable. When you systematically destroy people's economic prospects, make healthcare unaffordable, criminalize poverty, create housing crisis, and then criminalize the predictable results of these policies, you've created conditions where death becomes a rational response to government manufactured misery. This brings us to one of the most important arguments that I make in my book about the government's fraudulent claim to have a compelling state interest in our lives. Courts routinely invoke this phrase to justify denying people the right to die, claiming that the state has such a compelling interest in preserving life that it can override individual autonomy. But here's what a fundamental contradiction that Trump's executive order makes crystal clear. The state claims to have a compelling interest in our lives while doing absolutely nothing to make those lives worth living. It's every man for himself when you need help living, but suddenly the government has a compelling interest when you want to stop living. By controlling every aspect of our lives and playing this paternalistic role, the government has voluntarily assumed the role of being our caretakers. But you cannot control people like slaves while taking no responsibility for their well-being. If the government is going to exercise this level of control over our lives, then they must accept the corresponding responsibility to ensure those lives are actually worth living. And that means socialism. Now, I previously wasn't a proponent of socialism, but because the government has so much control over our lives, basically the government has champagne taste with beer money. They want to regulate everything. They want to take away your reproductive rights. They want to tell you whether you get to live or die. They want to impose barriers to entries when it comes to your right to earn a livelihood. So if you want to have so much authoritative control over our lives, you need to pay for this shit. We need some damn socialism to remunerate us for all this control and oppression that we have to live through. You have such a damn compelling interest in our lives. You need to pay for this shit. We need some. I mean, talk is cheap. You claim that you have a compelling interest in our lives. Then put your money where your mouth is. Give us some damn socialism. Give us some damn housing. Give us a damn livable wage. And again, I'm not a proponent of big government. I'm a damn anarchist. But because we don't have anarchy, we do have these big government policies. We have these draconian laws where states are claiming that they have basically general police powers to regulate every aspect of our lives. You need to put your damn money where your life is. Show us that you have a compelling interest in our lives, because courts don't actually make them prove it. They get to make a general statement that they have a compelling interest in our lives, and then the government just, or the courts just accept it at face value. They don't actually have to prove it. This is how they claim governmental immunity. They just claim that they have a compelling state interest, and then everybody just moves on. The case gets dismissed. Like I said, like I told you, I was going to file a federal lawsuit to try to fight for the right to medical assistance in dying, but I already know the outcome is so damn predictable. The courts are not going to do shit. The state is going to claim they have a compelling state interest, even though the state has not taken an interest in my life at all. And I'm talking about me specifically because when you file a lawsuit, you have to have standing. You have to show a concrete injury that actually pertains to you specifically. So the state has not taken an interest in my life. The state has destroyed every aspect of my fucking life, deprived me the right to earn a damn livelihood, relegated me to menial labor, prevented me from paying my damn student loans. And then when I want the right to die, they're going to claim to have a fucking compelling state interest, and they're going to force me to live against my will. This is some fucking system that this democratic system has fucking concocted. This fucking slave system. And I'm going to come back and address in detail how the 14th Amendment has really created a slave system. It's not liberation, right? The so-called sovereign citizens have already addressed this at length. I guess I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm going to stick to this topic. I will be addressing the 14th Amendment and how it has made us all slaves. Not just blacks. For those who think I'm playing a race card, I'm saying that all of us are slaves. The 14th Amendment was really only supposed to apply to slaves and their descendants, but they have given it broad application, which applies to everybody. And now we're all slaves. And it's not the federal government. Well, it's the federal government that is ceding all this authority to states because we are citizens of the states. And the states have general police powers, which basically just reduces us to slaves. I know I'm not really articulating myself right now because I'm going to address that in great detail. But I've been researching the case law, and now I really have a full picture of how this whole system has really enslaved us all. Now, let's get back to this criminalization of homelessness. As I write my book, if the government is going to have this much control over our lives, we should have socialism. Duties without rights make slavery. Rights without duties make anarchy. This is how I became a damn anarchist, because I realized the okie doke that we have all these duties to obey, and yet the government has no duties to us. So we have to obey, and the government, the social contract says that the sovereign has a duty to protect its citizens. That's the whole point. They get to stay in power so long as they are living up to their role as a government, as the sovereign, right? But they have abdicated that duty and that responsibility. The Supreme Court has already said that the police don't even have a duty to protect us. So how the hell do we have a duty to pay our taxes to be these obedient citizens? And then you don't even have a duty to protect us. You don't have a duty to provide us a living wage. It's every man for his fucking self. And then we don't even have the fucking right to die. This is bullshit, y'all. This is bullshit. And I can't wait until I drop this book, because I'm going to be promoting that book more than I did with my first book, because I felt like there really wasn't enough interest in that first book. But the right to die is so comprehensive. It speaks on everything. It speaks to the social contract. It speaks to your role in society. democracy is supposed to be based on consent of the governed. But if you don't even have a right to die, then how is this based on your consent? Life is imposed on you. You don't have a right to die. So all you have to do, the only choice that you have is to be subjugated under this oppressive fucking system. And now Trump is just going to arrest you and force, well, he's going to institutionalize you and force you to get pumped full of drugs. That's what the Trump administration is going to do. And I didn't want to be a Trump basher. I didn't want to fall into this Trump derangement syndrome. But Trump he's so much worse than he was during his first term. Right. I mean, I guess I'm criticizing him for legitimate reasons. For people who just want to say that he's Hitler without any substantiation, I'm not going to give too much weight to that. But Trump is authoritarian. Absolutely. Again, I'm not saying that Kamala Harris would have been much better. I think she would have been authoritarian in different ways. But Trump is definitely authoritarian. We don't need to talk about Kamala Harris because she's not in office. So I keep getting off track. Let's stick to the script. The more the government seeks to control us, the more it becomes responsible for taking care of us. This is the fundamental principle of the social contract. When citizens surrender individual autonomy to governmental authority, they receive in exchange governmental protection and provision for their welfare. Right? We need to be remunerated for all this fucking oppression that we fucking get. That's the fucking social contract. Remunerate us for our oppression. But our government has perverted this arrangement by claiming all authority while disclaiming all responsibility. The government has restricted access to abortion, which means under the social contract, it has assumed responsibility to take care of pregnant women and their children. You cannot force women to carry pregnancies to term while abandoning them to struggle alone in the economic, medical, and social consequences of forced motherhood. This is what I was talking to y'all about. Champagne taste with beer money. All talk, no action. They don't want to pay for shit. They just want to force you to live under their fucking rules, but they don't have to put their money where their mouth is. If the government claims authority to override reproductive autonomy, it must accept the corresponding obligation to ensure that forced pregnancy and parenthood do not result in destitution, homelessness, or medical bankruptcy. Similarly, when the government criminalizes homelessness while failing to provide housing, when it criminalizes drug use while failing to provide treatment, when it criminalizes mental illness while failing to provide care, it violates the basic principle that governmental authority must be matched by governmental responsibility. You cannot criminalize the predictable results of your policy failures while disclaiming obligation to address those failures. If the government doesn't want to accept responsibility for taking care of its citizens, then it should leave people alone and stop interfering with their autonomous decisions about their own lives. The government cannot have it both ways, claiming authority to control our reproductive choices, our housing situations, our medical decisions, and our death choices, while refusing to provide the resources that would make those controlled choices bearable. The government claims that life is so sacred, so inherently valuable, that it justifies overriding individual autonomy to prevent suicide. This sanctity doctrine supposedly compels them to criminalize medical assistance in dying while authorizing forced commitment for those who express suicidal ideation. This argument collapses under logical scrutiny when examined against the government's actual behavior. If life possesses inherent sanctity that justifies the governmental intervention to preserve it, then that same sanctity should logically mandate governmental intervention to ensure that sacred life maintains minimal standards of dignity, security, and basic welfare. Yet, the same government that invokes life sanctity to deny peaceful death simultaneously creates and maintains conditions that systematically desecrate that supposed sacred life. The logical contradiction is insurmountable. Either life possesses inherent sanctity that requires comprehensive governmental protection of its quality and dignity, or life's value depends on circumstances and individual assessment, in which case individuals retain authority to determine when their particular life no longer serves their interests. The government's seemingly contradictory approach criminalizes both suicide and the conditions necessary for dignified existence, actually serves a coherent economic logic that my book exposes. By making it illegal to live through criminalizing homelessness, poverty, and basic survival activities, while simultaneously making it illegal to die through criminalization of assisted suicide, the government creates captive populations that generate maximal revenue for institutional systems while possessing minimal alternative to continued participation. And this is something that I need to address also. Um, the so-called suicide prevention industrial complex. This is an entire racket. These people are not qualified. They have no expertise in suicide prevention. Um, and this is a band-aid for genuine conditions, right? If your quality of life has diminished to such an extent that you no longer want to live, they're going to be entirely dismissive and say that you just don't want to die because you have poor coping skills. This is all in your mind. This is a figment of your imagination. You just need to be pumped full of drugs. You don't need help with housing. You don't need help with finding a job. You don't need help with not being harassed by the fucking road pirates. You just need to be pumped full of drugs. You need to call a 988 hotline, and they're going to have the solutions to all of your damn problems. We don't have to take any responsibility for anything that we have done. We're just going to abdicate all responsibility for the social conditions that we have created, and we're going to direct you to call some fucking suicide prevention hotline. And that's going to be the fucking panacea for all problems. It's going to be the prophylactic that is going to absolve us of all accountability. We get to feel good because at least we provided a damn suicide prevention hotline, and we can say that we have actually helped you when we have done absolutely nothing to actually change your living conditions, right? And by the way, they're cutting assistance for suicide prevention hotlines also, even for fucking veterans who have served this damn country. When they manufacture consent to get us into these fucking frivolous wars over bullshit, over oppressing people in third world countries so we can steal their damn resources, right? No weapons of mass destruction. That was a fucking lie. And then you don't want to pay for the social services that are commensurate with the war that you fucking supported, right? You want to talk about how the military is a fucking welfare system, right? That's been that's been an argument that's been floating around. That the military is just a welfare. No, you actually have to serve in the military. You have to obey. You have to give up all of your freedom. That you have to obey these orders and do whatever the hell they tell you to do. If they send you to go to war, then you must give your life to defend this damn country. And if you actually survive it, then your reward is that you get to live the benefits that you have rightfully earned. It's not welfare because you actually earned it, right? Other people didn't. If it was welfare, then everybody would get it, right? It's not an entitlement. You have to earn it. You have to serve your time. You have to get an honorable discharge. And because of that honorable discharge, you are entitled to the services that you have earned. You are entitled to educational benefits. You are entitled to housing benefits. You are entitled to job privileges, right? You get veterans preferences when it comes to employment. There's a reason for that shit. Because, oh gosh, I'm getting off on a tangent. They had a hard time recruiting people after the Vietnam War, and they wanted to incentivize people joining the military. But again, I'm not going to get sidetracked too much. This dual criminalization ensures that people facing unbearable circumstances cannot legally exist in their current state, but also cannot legally escape the state through death. right? That's what Jean-Jacques Rousseau said in A Social Contract, that the sovereign has a duty to force people to be free. But they're not even going to allow you to escape. Their solution is, oh, if you don't like it, you can just move to another state, right? The other state is going to be just as oppressive as the last state you left. You can't even go to another country because the other country is going to be just as oppressive, maybe in different ways, but it's not a real escape. The only remaining option becomes acceptance of whatever institutional services the government chooses to provide, typically involve forced treatment, involuntary commitment, or incarceration that generates revenue for medical, therapeutic, and correctional industries while maintaining control over the affected populations. This brings us to one of the most insidious aspects of Trump's executive order and the broader governmental responses to the suffering they create: the mental health services deception. Throughout my book, I expose how simply giving people access to mental health services does nothing unless the government is willing to do something to actually improve their living conditions. Trump's order mandates that people receiving housing assistance undergo forced mental health treatment, but it does nothing to address the underlying conditions that create mental health crisis in the first place. This represents the perfect example of how the government uses mental health services as a tool of control rather than genuine assistance. When someone becomes depressed because they can't afford housing, the government's response isn't to make housing affordable, it's to force them into therapy while maintaining the housing policies that created their depression. When someone develops anxiety from economic insecurity, the government doesn't provide economic security, it provides anxiety medication while preserving the economic systems that generate anxiety. When someone becomes suicidal because their circumstances have become unbearable, the government doesn't improve those circumstances. It criminalizes their desire to escape while forcing them into psychiatric treatment. This approach serves multiple functions that have nothing to do with genuine mental health and everything to do with social control. First, it pathologizes rational responses to irrational circumstances, transforming legitimate grievances against systematic oppression into individual mental health problems, requiring medical intervention rather than social change. When you're depressed because you're homeless, that's not mental illness, that's a normal human response to abnormal circumstances. When you're anxious because you can't afford health care, that's not a psychiatric disorder. It is a rational reaction to a threatening situation. When you're suicidal because your government has made your life unbearable while denying you peaceful escape, that's not brain disease, that's accurate assessment of impossible circumstances. But by reframing these rational responses as mental health issues, the government can avoid addressing the systematic problems it created while positioning itself as compassionately providing treatment for the victims of its own policies. This therapy industrial complex becomes a mechanism for managing the systems of systematic oppression while preserving the oppression itself. Second, mental health treatment as currently practiced operates at the fundamental premise that the problem lies with the individual's mind rather than the social conditions they must navigate. Therapists are trained to help people adapt to existing circumstances rather than question whether those circumstances are themselves the source of psychological distress. You cannot therapeutically treat someone out of homelessness, you need housing. You cannot medicate someone out of poverty, you need economic security. You cannot counsel someone out of despair that comes from living in a society that treats them as disposable. You need social systems that value human dignity over profit extraction. But admitting this would require that the government acknowledge its role in creating the conditions that drive people to mental health crisis and to accept responsibility for changing those conditions rather than simply managing their psychological consequences. It is far cheaper and more politically convenient to provide therapy than to provide housing, to prescribe medication than to ensure economic security, and to offer counseling than to create social conditions where counseling becomes necessary. Let me stop for a minute to see if I have any comments. I'm cooking today. I have a lot to say. I can't wait until this book is out because I have so much to say. I'm not sure why no one has ever made these arguments, but yeah, I'm a huge proponent of socialism after seeing how the government has so much control over our fucking lives. Third, the emphasis on mental health services rather than material solutions serves the economic interests of the therapy industrial complex while avoiding the cost of actual social change. Mental health treatment creates permanent revenue streams through ongoing therapy, psychiatric medication, and institutional services that must be maintained indefinitely because the underlying problems are never addressed. If the government provided housing, healthcare, and economic security to everyone, the demand for mental health services would decrease dramatically because much psychological distress stems from material insecurity rather than inherent mental illness. But this would eliminate profitable industries which require massive public health investment and social infrastructure. Instead, the government can maintain profitable mental health industries while avoiding investment in social change by treating the symptoms of systematic oppression rather than address oppression itself. People become permanent customers for therapeutic services because the conditions creating their distress remain deliberately unaddressed. Perhaps most importantly, the mental health approach serves as a gaslighting function that prevents people from recognizing the systematic nature of their oppression while encouraging them to blame themselves for rational responses to irrational circumstances. When you're told that your depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts represent mental illness rather than requiring treatment, you learn to question your own perception rather than questioning the system creating your distress. This internalization of blame serves the government's interests into personal problems, collective issues into individual pathology, and systematic oppression into therapeutic opportunities. It prevents people from recognizing their suffering is not unique, but inevitable and not their own fault, but rather the predictable result of deliberate policy choices that could be changed if there were political will to change them. Trump's executive order represents the logical endpoint of this mental health deception. Forced treatment that serves institutional control rather than individual welfare. When the order mandates mental health treatment as a condition of receiving housing assistance, it's not survival. It's not providing health care. It's requiring ideological compliance as the price of basic survival. The message is clear. If you want access to housing, that should be a human right. Um, it's not that I think housing should be a human right, but because the government has so much control over our lives, that the government has the right to regulate whether you have a right to even earn a livelihood through their draconian occupational license requirements. Under that level of control, yes, housing is a right. Under their oppression that they have constructed, housing is a human right because it is a direct reaction to the amount of control that they have. You can't have so much control over everybody's lives and then think that you don't have any responsibility to provide for them, right? You accept that paternalistic role. Um, what is that talk show? You are the father? Yes, yes, motherfucker, you are the father. You need to pay some fucking child support, motherfucker. The government is your motherfucking daddy. They need to provide you housing, healthcare, and everything else that comes with their dictatorial control over our fucking lives. You are the what Maury Povich, right? You are the damn father. Whoever conceived you, they're no longer the damn father. There's no need for child support anymore because the government is now your damn daddy. The government impregnated your mother by denying her the right to reproductive control of her damn own body, and now they have assumed the role of being her damn father. So the government needs to fucking cough up whatever money it needs to cough up to pay for your fucking living expenses. All right, y'all. I'm really just ranting. I really need to get through this. This forced treatment serves no legitimate therapeutic purpose because it operates through coercion rather than consent, focuses on individual adaptation rather than environmental change, and serves institutional interests rather than patient welfare. It represents the complete corruption of mental health practice from healing into social control. But there's an even more fundamental constitutional problem with Trump's executive order that exposes the complete lawlessness of this approach. Detaining homeless people and forcing them into mental health facilities violates the Fourth Amendment because there was no probable cause to arrest them for committing a crime. The 14th Amendment protects against unreasonable seizures of persons, requiring that any detention be based on probable cause that the person has committed a criminal offense. But homelessness is not a crime, mental health illness is not a crime, and being unable to care for yourself by the government standards is not a crime, especially when the government has systematically eliminated the conditions that would make self-care possible. Trump's executive order attempts to authorize the seizure of persons based solely on their based solely on their status and circumstances rather than their conduct. But an executive order is not a substitute for a criminal code, and a president has no constitutional authority to create laws defining new crimes through executive order. Only Congress has the power to define federal crimes, and states retain authority over most criminal law within their jurisdictions. When Trump authorizes federal agencies to assist in mass detention of homeless people, he is directing federal law enforcement to participate in seizures that lack probable cause of criminal activity. This violates the most basic principle of constitutional law enforcement. You cannot detain someone without evidence that they have committed a crime, regardless of what executive orders might direct. But even beyond the Fourth Amendment violation, there's a more fundamental philosophical problem with any governmental authority to detain people based on alleged danger to themselves. When the government has no legitimate authority to detain people for merely being a danger to themselves under the principle of self-ownership, people have a right to harm themselves the same way they have a right to destroy property that they rightfully own. If you own something, you have the right or authority to dispose of it as you see fit, including through destruction. If people truly own their own lives, and if they don't, we're under slavery. Then they retain the same authority over their existence that they have over any other property they own. The term self-harm is fundamentally misleading because it contains a built-in conclusion. It assumes that people are harming themselves by dying when they could actually be causing more harm by living under unlivable conditions. This assumption serves institutional interests rather than individual welfare by defining any attempt to escape unbearable circumstances as inherently harmful, regardless of how harmful those circumstances might be. We all have to die at some point. None of us are immortal. The question is not whether we will die, but how, when, and under what circumstances. When the government claims authority to override individual decisions about timing and method of death, it claims ownership over the most fundamental aspect of human existence, while offering no corresponding benefit that would justify such comprehensive control. The concept of preventing self-harm through civil commitment operates on several false premises that serves institutional control rather than individual welfare. First, it assumes that continued existence under any circumstances is inherently preferable to non-existence, regardless of the quality of that existence or the individuals' assessment of their own circumstances. But this assumption is arbitrary and serves no legitimate governmental purpose. If someone concludes based on their own experience that their continued existence under their particular circumstances causes them more suffering than benefit, on what authority does the government have to override that assessment? What special knowledge do government officials possess about an individual's subjective experience that would justify forcing them to continue enduring circumstances that they find unbearable? Second, the self-harm framework assumes that death represents harm, while forced continued existence of unbearable circumstances represents help. But this reverse, this reversals, um, this reverses the actual relationship between the individual welfare and governmental intervention. When someone seeks peaceful death as an escape from circumstances they find intolerable, forcing them to continue living, enduring those circumstances represents the actual harm, while respecting their autonomous choice represents the actual help. Third, the entire concept ignores the reality that we must all die, making the relevant question not whether death actually occurs, but when it occurs at a time and manner chosen by the individual or imposed by external circumstances beyond their control. When the government forces people to continue living until death occurs through whatever means available, rather than peaceful medical assistance, it increases rather than decreases the actual harm excuse me. Let me read that over. When the government forces people to continue living until death occurs through whatever means become available, rather than through peaceful medical assistance, it increases rather than decreases the actual harm experienced. Under the principle of self-ownership, civil commitment for less danger to self represents the theft of the most fundamental form of property, ownership of one's own existence. When the government detains someone to prevent them from making autonomous decisions about their own life, it claims superior ownership over that life while providing no compensation or benefit that would justify such expropriation. Property remains Property rights exist precisely to prevent others from overriding the owner's decisions about how to use, maintain, or dispose of what they own. If I own a car, others cannot prevent me from selling it, giving it away, or destroying it based on their assessment that such disposal would be harmful to my interests. The same, if I own my life, others cannot prevent me from ending it based on their assessment that such ending would be harmful to my interests. The government's claimed authority to override autonomous death decisions represents the assertion that individual lives are actually government property that citizens are permitted to use only under conditions the government approves. Citizens, tenants, in their own existence to eviction from lives when the government determines that their choices not serve institutional interests. Right? This is what I was addressing before under the social contract. Only the sovereign has a right to force people to be free. Only the sovereign has a right to terminate lives. The sovereign can terminate lives of dogs and criminals, right? Criminals have a right to medical assistance in dying. Dogs have the right to medical assistance in dying. The only people who don't have the right to medical assistance in dying are law-abiding citizens. So the government is essentially punishing you for obeying the fucking law, for not harming people. In order to have the right to die, you would have to actually commit capital murder, right? How does that serve the government's interest? How does that serve the public interest? That the only way you have the right to commit capital murder. So in order for me to have the right to die, I would have to go and murder somebody. Mate. So as long as I don't murder anybody, to suffer and die a natural death. That makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. And I address this extensively in my book, that this is an entire okie doke. This reduces us to fucking slaves. Again, for those of you who are snowflakes who think that I'm playing a race card, this has nothing to do with race. The mere fact that I'm black making this argument does not mean that I'm playing a race card. I think we're all fucking slaves. White, black, Mexican, Chinese, fucking you could be a fucking Native American. I don't give a shit what your fucking race, your ethnicity is. If you live under this oppressive system which deprives you of the right to die, you don't own your life. You are a fucking slave, which is owned by the fucking state. That's what I'm going to address in a upcoming live stream, how the 14th Amendment has relegated all of us to slaves. Not just blacks, but all of us. All of us are fucking slaves. The entire framework of preventing self-harm through civil commitment rests on what might be called the immortality delusion, the false belief that governmental intervention can somehow prevent death rather than simply controlling its timing and method. But no governmental power can make anyone immortal, meaning that all civil commitment accomplishes is forcing people to die later rather than whatever means become, later through whatever means become available rather than sooner through peaceful medical assistance. This serves no legitimate governmental purpose while causing substantial harm to the individuals subjected to forced continuation of unbearable circumstances. When someone concludes that peaceful death is now preferable to continued suffering followed by eventual death anyway, the government offers no rational justification for overriding this assessment beyond the assertion of ownership over that person's existence. I mean, they're never going to say that shit. They're never going to say, oh, we actually own our citizens, right? They're never going to admit that the reason that they have a superior right over your lives than you do is because they actually own you. It explicitly says that in the social contract, right? It's not even something they teach in law school. So the public is completely ignorant of this. Most attorneys are ignorant of this. I think the courts are not ignorant of this, and any attorney who represents the government, for example, those who represent the Attorney General's office, if I were to file a damn lawsuit arguing for the right to medical assistance in dying, they know this shit. They are not ignorant. They know exactly what the damn social contract is. And although the social contract is not a legally binding document, it's not like the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or, I don't know, the Declaration of Independence. It's not. But they all know this. This is esoteric. This is some secret. It's not even secret, right? It's really hidden in plain sight. Anybody can read the damn social contract. I've gone over it, but nobody wanted to listen. That video got very few views, right? It's boring. But I think the social contract is just as important as the actual Constitution itself. This is what the framers were reading when they formed these founding documents, right? They read the damn social contract. They all understood this very well. They understood this shit. We don't know it. It's not something that is taught in law school. It's not even taught, even if you were a philosophy major, right? I was a political science major. I studied philosophy. Nobody talks about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Why? Because if you understood Rousseau's philosophy, you would actually have the tools to overthrow the government. Okay, I'm not going to go on a tangent about Rousseau, but that was Rousseau's writings were the philosophical underpinnings for the French Revolution, and that's how the French overthrew the monarchy. Anyway, let's continue because I could go on rants for days. Sometimes my live streams are too short, but sometimes I get on topics where I just have so much to say, and I really don't want to rant because I do want to stick on this topic, which I think is important in and of itself. But here's where the government's systematic destruction of human dignity creates an even deeper crisis that they're only beginning to understand. On the same day Trump signed this executive order criminalizing homelessness, on June 24, 2025, CBS reported that the U.S. birth rate hit its all-time low, dropping to fewer than 1.6 children being born per woman, well below the 2.1 needed for population replacement. This isn't coincidental. It's a predictable result of the government's systematic assault on human dignity and future prospects. People are not going to want to have children if they know that their children may be arrested simply for being homeless or otherwise don't have a future worth living. The CDC shows that the fertility rate has been declining for close to 2 decades as more women are waiting longer to have children or never taking that step at all. But the reports reveal something even more telling. People are marrying later and worried about their ability to have the money, health insurance, and other resources needed to raise children in a stable environment. As researcher Karen Guzzo noted, worrying is not a good moment to have kids. And that's exactly what the government has created, a society where rational people worrying about bringing children into conditions that the government has made deliberately unbearable. What we're witnessing now is the vindication of anti-natalist philosophy that many were historically dismissive as an extreme solution to the problems of existence. For decades, anti-natalists have argued that procreation is ethically problematic because it imposes existence on beings who cannot consent to that existence, particularly when that existence involves inevitable suffering. The mainstream's response was typically to dismiss these arguments as overly pessimistic or nihilistic, assuming that most lives contain sufficient pleasure to justify their creation. But the current collapse in birth rates reveals that many people are forced to confront the actual conditions their children would inherit rather than relying on optimistic bias to assume those conditions will improve. They suddenly realize that it's not advisable. Excuse me, y'all. Let me read that because I'll just chop that up completely. But the current collapse in birth rates reveals that when people are forced to confront the actual conditions their children would inherit, rather than relying on optimism bias to assume those conditions will improve, they suddenly realize it's not advisable to procreate under demonstrably adverse circumstances. This recognition implicitly recognizes the core anti-natalist insight. If it's wrong to create children under bad conditions, then it is logically, potentially wrong to procreate under any circumstance because conditions can invariably deteriorate regardless of their current circumstances. And let me just expound on that, right? Because everybody thinks that just because things are good right now, that things are always going to be good, right? Do you think that people who lived through the Depression thought that the Depression would happen? No. Do you think that people who were sent to Vietnam to get bombed, to get blown up and shot, do you think they knew that shit? No. Do you think people who lived through the Holocaust knew that they were going to be sent to some camps, rounded up, and they were just going to waste away and starve? No. Do you think the Palestinians knew? Well, I'm not going to go there. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that people always think that things are going to get better. They have hope for the future. They always do. Even under the worst circumstances, even slavery, because I'm going to circle back to that. Don't think that I'm going to absolve the black community for their role in slavery, right? You know that you're enslaved, that you got to pick cotton, that you're getting whipped, that you're getting raped, and what your decision is to procreate anyway, right? You can talk about how many of those women were raped, but many of those women were voluntarily procreating because they got better conditions while they were pregnant. They didn't have to work in the field. They had light duty, right? Even if you were, oh gosh, I'm not going to go there. This is where the whole reproductive freedom conversation comes in. Of course, there was no abortion back then, but there was infanticide. If y'all watched the movie Beloved, when a slave master came to take her children, what did she do? She forced them to be free, which is what Jean-Jacques Rousseau said. So she made the hard choice, right? Some people would say that was barbaric. That's what it's called being a noble savage. This is the reason why I talk about how civilization degenerates people. I think she made the right decision. Under those circumstances, it is much more ethical to put your children out of their fucking misery than to force them to live a life of fucking bondage. And they're just going to die anyway. So people would say she's a savage. I would say she's a noble savage. And she should be a damn noble savage. So it is admirable to be a damn noble savage. You should not be what I just created this archetype of, what do I call them? I call them the civilized brute. Don't be a fucking civilized brute. Don't do that shit. And that video got very few views. Y'all need to watch that because I'm going to be referencing that archetype very often. The civilized brute is very dangerous, far more dangerous than a noble savage. But again, I am ranting and I'm trying not to do it. But again, I have so much to say about this topic. Anything relating to the right to die, I have so much to say because I want that right for my fucking self. I don't want to have to jump off a fucking cliff or blow up my own fucking brains. I want fucking medical assistance in dying. Now, where was I? This psychological phenomenon of optimism bias typically prevents people from seriously considering this logical conclusion. Optimism bias leads individuals to overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes while underestimating risks. Right? This is what this is what David Benatar calls the Pollyanna bias. Creating a cognitive framework where most prospective parents assume their children will experience better conditions than currently exist. But when governmental policies make those deteriorated conditions imminent and visible rather than merely theoretical, the optimism bias can no longer maintain its protective function against logical analysis. What's particularly intellectually significant about this demographic shift is that it represents a collision between abstract philosophical argumentation and concrete material reality, right? This is I guess I'm going to use the word that I used in my last live stream. Instantation, right? Instantation, right? I'm trying to increase my vocabulary, y'all. So I'm using these words, instantation, that's what it is. So before, anti-natalism was thus completely theoretical, right? No, it is of no moment because everyone thinks life is wonderful, right? They can only see what's in front of them. But now that things are suddenly becoming dire, now all of a sudden, people wanted to give some fucking credence to what we've been saying all fucking along. I've said this shit. Excuse me, y'all. I told y'all, the reason people are so dismissive of anti-natalism is because they haven't suffered enough. In order for people to have some fucking empathy, they need to go through it themselves. They need to see their fucking children suffer and then realize what they have done to their fucking children. They don't have the intellectual capacity or foresight to actually see that, okay, this is possible, right? my children could possibly experience XYZ. No, they need to fucking see it. And by then it's too fucking late. So all of these doomsday scenarios are of no moment to them because they can't see it. It's not something that they've lived through. People need to really experience adversity themselves before they fucking wake up. And by then it's too fucking late. They don't have the empathy. It's a certain type of intelligence. They don't have that. They don't have, like, they have an aversion to accepting a doomsday scenario because they have a fear of their own annihilation, right? They can't just accept that things are going to get worse because their motivation for continuing on day to day is to have a Pollyanna worldview, right? They get up with a fucking smile and talk about how life is so fucking fantastic, right? Somebody asked them, how are you doing? Oh, life is so wonderful. It's just fucking sunshine and rainbows. It's not for many of us, but they don't give a shit about what's going on for the rest of us. They don't have to experience it. So when they ask you how you're doing and you say, well, first of all, you can't even answer the damn question honestly. You have to put on a fucking fake smile and say that life is wonderful. Because if you do say that life isn't wonderful, you don't even have to say that life isn't wonderful. All you have to just say is, oh, I'm okay, right? Just saying that you're just okay is disconcerting to many people. You're just okay. Why aren't things great? Why can't you just say that life is wonderful? Right? They pretty much bully you into lying and say that you're fucking fantastic, even though you're not. You can't say that anything is wrong. You can't say, oh, I'm sad that my fucking father died, right? I had to fucking watch him cough up blood and fucking waste away, and then he fucking disinherited me. And even though I was the one who was there for him and fucking made sure that his last days were as comfortable as possible. Without me, he would have fucking suffered. Anyway, that you can't talk about any of that shit. You can't talk about how you're stuck in a shitty job because they want you to say that you love your fucking job, your fucking meaningless job, which gives you no fucking pleasure because you went to fucking law school to practice law. Instead, you're doing some fucking shitty menial job that gives no purpose to your fucking life. But you're supposed to pretend that you're so fucking happy about it. This is how I talk at length about the fucking civilized group. This is the system that has been constructed. This entire system is so fucking comprehensive. This is a solution for everything, right? This is how the system perpetuates itself. You have to pretend that you're happy. If you're not happy, you're going to be fucking institutionalized. Everyone's going to say that you have a suicidal ideation and you need to be saved from your own fucking self-harm. This shit is so fucking toxic. It's so fucking perverse. We're so far away from fucking natural law and the state of nature. And I think it's too late. I think the system, unless there is some type of economic collapse, which forces people to reassess this fucking civilization bullshit, it's just a downward spiral that's going to continue to get infinitely worse. And people are not going to wake up because they're in some type of isolated bubble where they can't see other people suffering. They don't give a shit. It doesn't affect them. The fact that you're complaining about how horrible your life is doesn't mean anything because they don't see it. Even if you tell them, they don't want to hear it because you're too fucking pessimistic. Fucking suck it up, Buttercup. Get over it. Put on a fucking smiley face because your fucking negativity is going to rub off on me. You're ruining my fucking day. I don't want to hear that shit. Pretend that you're fucking happy, as my mom would do. She would just punch me and say, fix your face. I'm going to beat you with a fucking extension cord and then beat you into submission until you fucking pretend to be happy. That's essentially what Trump is going to do. He's effectively beating with a fucking extension cord. He's going to throw you into some fucking mental health institution, take away your fucking liberty, pump you up full of drugs, and force you to be fucking happy. They're going to fill you up with so many drugs that you have no choice but to be happy. have so much serotonin and dopamine running through your fucking system that you're going to be medically induced to being happy, even though you are genuinely miserable. You're miserable, but you're not going to know that you're miserable because the drugs are going to tell you that you're fucking happy. Gosh, I'm never going to get through this shit because I'm just ranting for days. What's particularly intellectually significant about this demographic? No, I already read that. Let me move on to the next one. I'm just going to continue reading and try not to editorialize any more of this so I can actually get through this. Think about the rational calculation perspective parents must have in Trump's America. Why would you create a child knowing that if economic circumstances force them into homelessness, the government will criminalize their existence? Why would you bring a child into a world where sleeping in a public with a blanket becomes grounds for arrest and forced institutionalization? Why would you have children knowing if they develop mental illness from the economic stress that government creates, they could be detained without probable cause and forced into treatment designed to make them accept unbearable conditions rather than addressing those conditions? Why would you create life knowing that if life becomes unbearable, the government will criminalize people's escape while forcing continued suffering? The government has created a society where forcing people the government has created a society where having children becomes an act of cruelty towards those children. When you make housing unaffordable, housing inaccessible, education financially ruinous, employment unstable, and then criminalize the predictable results of those policies, you make parenthood a gamble where the likely outcome is your child's systematic oppression. The CBS reports notes that people are worried about their ability to have the money, health, insurance, and other resources needed to raise children in a stable environment, but these aren't natural conditions. These are the direct results of government policy choices that prioritize corporate profits over human welfare. Housing costs housing costs have become unaffordable because the government treats shelter as a commodity rather than a human right. I just want y'all to know that I'm not ignorant. I know that housing is not a natural right. It's not a right under natural law. This is a legal right. It's a legal construct. But what I'm saying is because the government has usurped its role in society, it's acting ultra vires beyond its constitutional scope because the government has gone so far to exceed its enumerated authority. I'm saying under this construct that the government has created, yes, housing is a fucking right because the government has so much fucking control, right? What did I say? Rights without duties make anarchy. Duties without rights make slavery. So this is what the government has fucking created. The government has fucking champagne taste with beer money. They want all the fucking control with none of the fucking responsibility. So under this fucking construct, yes, housing is a fucking right. Even though I'm a fucking anarchist and I don't believe in big government policies, this is what the government has fucking created. I just want y'all to know that I'm not ignorant. I know that healthcare is not a natural right, but I'm just explaining why I have come to this position based on the government's position. Healthcare remains tied to employment while the government eliminates stable employment through policies that benefit the wealthy while destroying working class prospects. Education costs have skyrocketed because the government refuses to invest in public education while subsidizing private profit from student debt. When the government creates economic conditions where rational people cannot afford to raise children, then criminalizes homelessness that results from those conditions. It creates a comprehensive system that makes reproduction economically irrational while making alternatives to reproduction legally impossible. The report mentions that Trump has backed the idea of baby bonuses. This is a whole pet project of J.D. Vance. Um, they're going to create baby bonuses to encourage more couples to have children. But this reveals the fundamental hypocrisy of the entire approach. You cannot bribe people to create children for a system designed to abuse those children. You cannot offer financial incentives for reproduction while criminalizing the conditions that reproduction creates when economic circumstances change. A baby bonus that might encourage conception does nothing to address the systematic conditions that make raising children into dignified adults impossible. Right? This is the part that they don't understand. You're going to spend most of your life as an adult trying to navigate this fucking oppressive system. Simply encouraging people to have babies is not a solution, right? Of course, you can pay people to have some fucking children. If they're rational, they will fucking reject it because there is no fucking golden parachute when they fucking become adults. So if you really, if you're entirely selfish and you don't give a fuck about your own damn children, which most people are, by the way, you're going to accept these fucking baby bonuses. You're going to accept the fucking tax credits for having fucking children. The where you don't even pay any fucking taxes because you get more on your fucking refund than you fucking paid into the fucking system. So the system is literally paying you to have some fucking children, and those of us who don't have any children get fucking penalized. We have to pay more children because we were fucking responsible. And then society also wants to put a fucking stigma on us, tells us that we're fucking selfish because we didn't have any fucking children, even though we're fucking putting more money into the fucking pot. We're subsidizing the heteronormative lifestyle that they get to have fucking children, and we get to pay more fucking taxes because we didn't have any children. On top of that, we get no fucking assistance for our fucking student loans, right? Our student loan payments, right? They're basically determined based on our family size. So you don't qualify for the economic hardship because you don't have any fucking children. You gotta fucking pay that shit, right? If I would have had fucking 5 children, I could claim fucking economic hardship, but I don't get to do that because I decided to be fucking responsible and get my fucking self sterilized. Right. This shit is so fucking perverse. This shit is fucking ass backwards. I'm going to skip through some of this because I do need to get through this. And I'm not even looking to see if there's anybody here. I'm just trying to get through this for my own personal completion. I need to get through this so that I can go back. Y'all know that I listen to my own content. So even if nobody else listens to my content, I listen to it. And months later, I'm going to be listening to this as a frame of reference. So I do need to get this through this for my own benefit. Prospective parents look at the society Trump and the Supreme Court have created. They see a future where children might face simply for existing while poor. They see a system that creates mental health crises through systematic oppression, then forces treatment designed to make people accept that oppression rather than addressing its causes. They see a government that will claim compelling interest in their children's lives while refusing to ensure those lives have access to housing, healthcare, economic security, or a peaceful escape when circumstances become unbearable. They see a system that forces existence while making that existence as miserable as possible for anyone who falls outside narrow parameters of acceptable participation. The rational response to such a system is to refuse participation in creating new victims for governmental abuse. Right? This is what I'm trying to tell you. The most effective approach is anti-natalism. Don't create new children in the first place, and then there is nobody to oppress. Right? You can't throw your fucking children to the fucking wolves and then do a fucking post hoc assessment of how you're going to protect your damn children. You can't do that shit. It doesn't fucking work. Don't have them in the fucking first place, right? You can't protect your damn children under this oppressive ass system. Antinatalism is the fucking solution. It is the prophylactic for all fucking oppression. When you make life systematically unbearable while criminalizing escape from the unbearability, people will eventually refuse to create new life rather than subject their children to systematic torture disguised as public policy. As I argue throughout my book, the solution to government manufactured mental health crises is not more mental health services, it's changing the material conditions that create psychological distress in the first place. People need housing, healthcare, and economic security, and genuine alternatives to oppressive systems, not therapy designed to help people accept their own oppression. When someone is suicidal because their circumstances have become unbearable, the solution is either to change those circumstances or to respect their autonomous decision that peaceful death is preferable to continued unbearable circumstances. What serves no purpose is forcing them to continue enduring circumstances that rational people would find intolerable while providing therapy designed to convince them those circumstances are acceptable. The government's mental health approach serves everyone's interests except those of the people actually suffering. It generates revenue for therapeutic industries, provides political cover for officials who claim they're addressing mental health, and prevents collective resistance by individualizing systematic problems, but it does nothing to address the root causes of distress while denying people the peaceful escape that would end their suffering entirely. This trajectory established by the Supreme Court, grasp past decision, and Trump's executive order creates a constitutional crisis that demands immediate resolution. When a government can criminalize existence while detaining people without probable cause, when it can claim authority over life and death decisions while disclaiming responsibility for life quality, when it can force treatment for conditions it created while denying escape from those conditions, constitutional government ceases to exist. The solution requires the recognition that governmental authority must be matched by governmental responsibility. If government exists on controlling reproductive, if the government insists on controlling reproductive choices, housing policies, and medical decisions and death options, then it must accept full responsibility for ensuring that controlled existence meets standards that rational individuals would consider worth living. Alternatively, if the government disclaims responsibility for ensuring adequate living conditions, then it must accept individual autonomy over death decisions when those conditions become unbearable. The government cannot continue claiming authority over death while disclaiming responsibility for life quality. This serves only institutional interests in maintaining captive populations for revenue extraction while violating every principle of constitutional government. The declining birth rate reveals the ultimate consequence of systematic governmental cruelty. People will eventually refuse to create new victims for institutional abuse. When you make life systematically unbearable while criminalizing escape from that unbearability, you force people to exist in conditions they find intolerable while denying them peaceful alternatives. Then you criminalize homelessness, making housing unaffordable. Rational people will choose not to reproduce rather than subject their children to comprehensive oppression. Justice Sotomayor's questions revealed her question revealed the logical impossibility of the current system. When you make living conditions unbearable and deny when you make living conditions unbearable and dying illegal while detaining people without probable cause for the crime of existing in circumstances you created, you have established a comprehensive system of torture disguised as public policy. The declining birth rate proves that people are beginning to understand this system and refuse to participate in creating new victims for government abuse. Under the principle of self-ownership, people retain the same authority over their own existence that they have over any property they own, including the authority to dispose of that property as they see fit. Civil commitment for a last danger to represent or self Civil commitment for a last danger to self represents theft of the most fundamental form of property while serving no legitimate governmental purpose beyond institutional control over individual autonomy. We all must die eventually. The only question is whether that death occurs through individual choice or government force, and the government has no legitimate interest to override autonomous decisions about the timing and method of inevitable mortality. Um, I'm not going to read my normal conclusion because, again, I am streaming on both channels. So with that, I'm just going to say be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And thank y'all for being here. And I guess that's the end. But I am going to come back to follow up to explain how the 14th Amendment has made us all slaves. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.